In the bloody chaos of the American Civil War, there was one group of men who stood taller than the rest, not just in stature, but in courage. They weren't born legends, but they would die as them. This is the story of the Iron Brigade, and it begins not with glory, but with a hat. They came from the farms and forests of Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan, ordinary men with extraordinary grit. Unlike most Union soldiers who wore the familiar blue kepi, these men chose something else: tall, black Hardee hats, sharp, bold, unmistakable. To their fellow soldiers, they looked like veterans before they even fired a shot. To their enemies, they were a warning, but when the war began in 1861, no one had heard of the Iron Brigade. They were just another group of fresh recruits, marching toward a war that would consume over 600,000 American lives. What set them apart was what came next. September 14, 1862, the Battle of South Mountain. The Union Army was advancing through the rugged mountain passes of Maryland, desperate to halt a Confederate invasion. As bullets tore through the trees and smoke choked the air, one Union general watched these black-hatted soldiers hold their ground like stone, and that's when it happened. General George B. McClellan, not known for giving out praise, turned to his staff and said 6 words that would define them forever: they must be made of iron. From that moment on, the Iron Brigade was born, but their reputation wasn't built on words. It was forged in blood. Unlike many units that broke under the pressure of Confederate fire, these men stood firm. When others retreated, they advanced. When others hesitated, they charged. Their discipline was unmatched, their bravery unquestionable, and people noticed. Confederate troops began to recognize those black hats from across the field, and they hated seeing them. One rebel soldier wrote in his diary, "Here come those damn black-hatted fellows again." That wasn't just fear. That was respect, yet the cost of glory is always high. The Iron Brigade would go on to fight in some of the deadliest battles of the war. They would face cannon fire, bayonet charges, and near constant death, but they never wavered. Not once. They weren't just soldiers. They were a symbol of strength, of defiance, of unshakable will, and this was only the beginning. The year was 1862, and the war had turned from patriotic songs to rivers of corpses. The Union needed men who wouldn't flinch, who wouldn't run, who would fight when all hope seemed lost. And at Antietam, they got exactly that. Antietam Creek. September 17th, the single bloodiest day in American military history. Over 22,000 men fell in just one day. And at the center of that storm was the Iron Brigade. As the fog lifted from the fields of Maryland, Confederate troops dug into the West Woods, a killing ground surrounded by trees. Most units would have hesitated. Not the Iron Brigade. They charged straight into musket fire, through the smoke, over fallen comrades. They cleared the woods with unrelenting fury, forcing seasoned Confederate soldiers to break and run. But the price? Hundreds of their own left behind lifeless, limbs shattered, faces unrecognizable. Yet somehow they stood tall, and then came Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. It was meant to be a quiet day, a small skirmish. But war doesn't care about calendars. Before noon, the Iron Brigade faced a Confederate division 3 times their size. Outnumbered, surrounded, exhausted, but when the smoke cleared that night, it was their black hats that still held the field. They fought with a kind of ferocity that defied logic. Men fell, screamed, bled, and still, the line never broke. Imagine this. Out of 1,883 Iron Brigade soldiers who marched into Gettysburg, only 671 remained standing at the end of the day. That's a casualty rate of over 60%. Let that number sink in. 60%. Some companies were reduced to less than 10 men. But those men held the line like a wall of ghosts, silent, grim, and unmovable. Confederate soldiers began calling them those black-hatted devils. They didn't know their names, but they remembered the hats. And the way they kept coming. One Iron Brigade soldier later wrote, "We did not fight to be remembered. We fought because no one else would." But There's something people don't tell you about iron. It bends before it breaks. And these men, they were bending. Beneath the medals and newspaper headlines, they were scarred. Not just in flesh, but in the soul. They'd seen too much, buried too many friends, carried too many final words in blood-soaked pockets, and yet the war wasn't done with them. Low drumbeat builds tension. Shots of empty fields, broken rifles, and folded flags. They were still called heroes, still feared by the Confederacy, still respected across the Union ranks. But behind the black hats and bullet-riddled flags, they were breaking dot by late 1863. Many of the original men were gone, dead, maimed, shattered. In some regiments, the living were outnumbered by the names etched into headstones. And still, the orders kept coming, more battles. More blood. At the Wilderness, they marched straight into a forest fire fueled by gunpowder and pine. Trees exploded, smoke blinded men. Wounded soldiers screamed as the flames crawled over their broken bodies. And yet the Iron Brigade advanced, again and again and again, but this wasn't the brigade it used to be. The black hats were now worn by replacements, young, fresh, proud to wear the badge of iron, but unaware of what it truly meant. Many of the original soldiers, the veterans of Antietam and Gettysburg, were gone, buried in shallow graves, lost to history or worse, still alive but carrying ghosts inside them. One survivor wrote home, "We used to count how many days we had served. Now we count how many men are left. And each day that number gets smaller. Some called it bravery, others called it madness." But the Iron Brigade didn't stop. They couldn't. Their reputation marched ahead of them. And so did the expectation that they would never retreat, never falter, that they would stand like iron, even if it killed them. And it did. By the time the war ended in 1865, the Iron Brigade had suffered one of the highest casualty rates of any unit in the entire Union Army. Over 60% of them never made it home. Those who didn't come back as the same men. Some couldn't speak about what they'd seen. Others spoke only to the bottle. Many carried physical wounds, missing limbs, shattered faces. But the worst damage was invisible. They saw faces in the smoke, heard voices in the silence, woke up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced they were still on the field. There were no medals for that. No parades, just quiet dinners with empty chairs, and yet they never asked for pity, because deep down they knew they had become something more than soldiers, something forged in the furnace of war, something iron. Long after the cannons went silent, the Iron Brigade kept marching, not in formations, not in history books, but in whispers, in shadows, in the places where the dead don't rest. They say the land remembers, the blood, the fear, the final screams that never had time to fade. And nowhere is that more true than the battlefields they once called home. Gettysburg, Antietam, South Mountain. Locals talk about strange things in these places, strange presences. Late at night, when the fog rolls in thick and low, there are those who swear they've seen them, tall figures in long coats and black Hardee hats, walking silently across the fields. Not reenactors, not men. Something else. Park rangers at Gettysburg have reported hearing distant marching, boots crunching in unison across the ground, only to find the field completely empty. Others claim they've seen shadows standing, still among the trees, only to vanish when approached, always facing the enemy's old line, as if still waiting for the next order to come. In one chilling account, a visitor staying near Culp's Hill woke in the dead of night to the sound of a drum cadence, slow, methodical, unrelenting. When he looked out his window, he saw a line of soldiers in black hats, barely lit by moonlight, standing motionless in the mist. They did not speak, they did not move. They simply watched. When he blinked, they were gone. Some say these are just stories, trauma echoing through generations. But others believe the Iron Brigade never really left, that their duty, their sacrifice, bound them to the soil they fought for, not out of fear, not out of revenge, but out of loyalty, out of love for something they gave everything to protect. they weren't the only ones who died on those fields. But there's something different about the Iron Brigade, something unwilling to fade, because when a man gives his life for a cause, he dies, but when a man becomes legend, he lingers, and maybe, just maybe, that's what legends are meant to do. Dramatic pause. The music fades to a low hum. Visuals of still fog, worn memorials, and names carved into stone. If you ever find yourself walking the fields of Gettysburg at dusk, and the air turns cold and the wind stops, listen carefully. You might just hear them, the Iron Brigade still standing. Still waiting, still watching. If this story moved you, if you believe these stories deserve to live on, then honor the past by helping it be remembered. Like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of time.